Hey, man.
All right, good morning, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome to the Advisory Committee meeting for the Marijuana Violation Reclassification. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend this morning's meeting. My name is Nicole Blase and I am the Rules Coordinator for the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission. A few housekeeping notes before we get started this morning. Today's meeting is being recorded. Please be aware of whether or not your phone or computer is muted. Committee members are asked to remain on mute until the introductions portion of the meeting. Only invited committee members will be a part of today's conversation. Members were selected due to their level of interest or position within the community. With that in mind, we ask that each of you serve as goodwill ambassadors to the discussion so that you may represent your constituency professionally. Please be courteous to other committee members so that we don't have multiple participants speaking at once. You may use the raise hand function in Teams, or if you are calling in, please interject when appropriate and we will call on you in order. Non-committee members will be able to tender comments during the public hearing and during the comment period. Committee members, please state your first and last name when you make a comment for the record. In hopes of cultivating a platform for better discussion, we will not be doing a share screen during the rules discussion portion of this RAC. That being said, please be sure you have a copy of the draft rules in front of you, or let us know if you need a copy sent to you. Let's get started. Today is Tuesday, September 6th at approximately 9 a.m. Many of you are familiar with the rulemaking process. But for those of you who have not yet had the opportunity, or for those listening in, I will begin by saying a few words about rulemaking and the purpose of advisory committee meetings. The purpose of an advisory committee is to increase the public's involvement in the drafting and development of administrative rules. The Oregon Legislature, through its enactment of the Administrative Procedures Act, ORS Chapter 183, stresses the critical importance of the public's participation in policy development. Advisory committees are an excellent way to solicit input from internal and external stakeholders who are likely to be impacted by the development or amendment of the agency policy and rule. Consequently, advisory committee invitees may include licensees, permittees, industry representatives, OLCC staff, members of law enforcement, local government, the public, local community organizations, small businesses, and other interested stakeholders. The purpose of having all of the members on this committee today is to hear from different parts of the industry and public health and safety partners. The Commission strives to hear from all interested parties. Our role today will be to explain the background and context of these rules and the changes that are being proposed in this package. We will provide facilitation to ensure that all committee members can provide input today. During this morning's meeting, the OLCC will seek your input on the proposed amendments to the Marijuana Violation Reclassification Rules Package. Today, staff will explain the proposed language changes to the violation reclassification by amending Oregon Administrative Rules Chapter 845, Division 25. This rulemaking package includes various violation changes outlined for the agency to follow in 2021 Senate Bill 408, codifying in Rule Marijuana Recall Policy and additional changes to make the OLCC administrative rules more accessible and easier to comply with. Under Oregon's public meeting law, this meeting is open to the public, and members of the public are meeting and will produce and circulate a record of our discussion. However, because this meeting is intended to promote the open exchange of ideas, we will maintain an informal atmosphere and meeting minutes will record only the topics discussed and the main points made. Approximately 1 week after our meeting, we will post and distribute the meeting's audio. We will now move on to introductions. We will be calling on you to introduce yourself. When introducing yourself, please state your name and the organization you are representing. Again, my name is Nicole Blase, and I am the Rules Coordinator for the OLCC. Rich Evans.
Good morning, everybody. Rich Evans. I'm the Senior Director of Licensing and Compliance for OLCC. You want me to pass it to one of our own, Nicole?
Great.
Amanda.
Hey, thanks. Amanda Borup. I'm a policy analyst with the OLCC. Stephen.
Stephen Crowley, Hemp and Cannabinoid Compliance Coordinator with OLCC. Anthony.
Good morning, Anthony Galtoski, Policy Analyst for the OLCC. Jason, you're on.
Good morning, Jason Hansen, Director of Compliance with the OLCC. Let's see, I see David Staniford's on.
David Staniford, Lab Compliance Coordinator with the OLCC. And I see Nathan.
Morning, everybody. Nathan Ricks, Deputy Director, Strategy and Policy, OLCC. And I think that's all the OLCC people. But Nicole, if I'm wrong, feel free to pass it on.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're right. Let's move on to the Rules Advisory Committee members. And I do apologize in advance if I mispronounce your name. Max Dumistra. Okay, Ellie Niles.
Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm the Senior Compliance Manager for Nectar Markets.
Thanks, Ellie. Claire Argast.
Good morning, Claire Argast, Compliance and Licensing Manager for Groundworks Industries.
Thank you, Claire. Tamzid Sardar. Okay, Laura Vega.
Morning, everyone. Laura Vega, and I am the owner of the cannabis processing company, Green State of Mind, and the executive director of a cannabis work training nonprofit named Endeavor Oregon.
Thank you, Laura. Jesse Bonteque.
Hi, I am Jesse Bonteque, the Executive Director of the Cannabis Industry Alliance of Oregon, which is the new entity formed out of the Oregon Retailers of Cannabis Association, Oregon Industry Progress Association, and Farms Inc. All those combined to form CIA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesse. Marianne Kirsty.
Hi, I'm Marianne Kirsty, co-founder and CEO of Alibi Cannabis, and we're a tier 2 indoor producer.
Thank you. Will Rasmussen.
Will Rasmussen. I'm an administrative law partner at Miller Nash, and for a couple of years now, I've been working with industry leaders and agency on enforcement reform and violation things.
Thank you, Will. Alejandro Tani. Alicia Davis. Amy Manoso.
Hi, my name is Amy Manoso, and I'm a stay-at-home mom, member of the public.
Great, thank you. Ben Almond. Jackie Marsden. James Horvath. Peter Watts. William Tyler Wynn.
Good morning, I'm Tyler Wynn, and I'm with Hawaii Cultivators, co-owner.
Thank you. Sunny Summers.
Good morning, Sunny Summers. I'm Senior Policy Advisor at the Oregon Department of Agriculture.
Thank you. Tyler Bechtel.
Hello and good morning. I'm Sergeant Tyler Bechtel with the Oregon State Police Drug Enforcement Section. I run our Northwest Region marijuana team.
Thank you. Megan Lockwood.
Good morning, everybody. Megan Lockwood. I'm the section manager for the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program.
Thank you, Megan. Margaret Flershinger. and TJ Rice. All right, thank you all so much for attending. We will now move on to our discussion of the proposed rules language for the violation reclassification. And with that, I will turn it over to Rich Evans.
Morning, everybody. Just want to go over some brief things. Obviously, there's a lot of rules to go over today. The first couple of rules will be denial criteria that Stephen will cover. What I was hoping to do was to, when I get through it, just read the number of the rule and then ask for input instead of reading the entire rule. We'll be here all day long if we did that. So I'd start at the top and like 1165. I'll read the title of the rule, and then the change there is that it's a Cat 3. One of the things that you will see is that every possible violation now has a category. And the reason we're doing that is Senate Bill 408, and also being able to have our industry members realize exactly what the violations are. Some of these have been charged as Cat 3s, Cat 4s, Cat 2s in the past. They just haven't had the language. And so what I'm hoping to do on those is have a debate on whether or not, or seek input on whether or not you believe that these are at the right category. There's some other things that are substantial changes. The mitigation factors, that has been changed substantially. And I believe we'll have some discussions on that section. There's also some changes to the penalty chart and a couple of other substantive changes. So there is a lot of stuff to cover today, and I'm hoping that we can stay on track and continue through. But I definitely will listen and be taking notes. You have to remember that I have 91 pages in front of me of the rules that I'm going to have to sort through at the same time as I'm checking off. So please be patient. And I will turn it over. Before I do that, before I turn it over to Stephen Crowley, anybody have any questions on how to go through this? Or any concerns about going through it one rule at a time, just reading off the number and then seeking input? Maybe some of them may not even have much input. Any issues with that? Anybody? All right. Will, I love you looks like you're in the sun, buddy. You're like
I know, I'm working on apparently this half of my face.
yeah,
that framework sounds good, Rich. You know, as I like to do on these, I had a chance to circle up with the industry folks, at least the OCA and CIA leadership, and a number of the folks on this call, and just big picture feedback to that structure. That sounds good. Really appreciate that you and whoever else went through this made an act, put categorization for each violation. That's something we've been talking about that would be helpful for industry for a while. And generally, folks really like the direction of this. Most of the classifications you've laid out here kind of make sense. There's maybe 5 or 6 where you'll hear me and others probably chime in and say a little bit more nuanced. Maybe some parts of this should be a lower categorization, but as far as overall structure, that's great. And the only other add is that the kind of draft language down at the bottom about
records,
addressing old violations and what we can do about that. Industry is going to suggest that we just authorize OLCC to have a process to actually downgrade some of those to a warning, even though, they happened a couple of years ago. If somebody can demonstrate that they've solved any policies or practices that led to the violation, as just any, and this, Rich, but just for everybody else, that's about Oregon licensees applying in other states. And if there's things that might not have necessarily been a violation, but they took a violation for, it really holds them back. So really appreciate that the agency put this together, and your approach of diving through rule by rule sounds great.
All right, I appreciate that, Will. And what Will was talking about at the end is we're trying to figure out a way to allow somebody with a violation in our state to say that they're licensable in another state. And I know that Steve, Director Marks, has talked to CANRA saying that we're moving forward with this and hoping other states do also. And that, licensability is an important thing going forward. So that is the last one, Will, and I did take a stab at it and broad language, and I'll definitely want some input on that. So I will turn it over to Mr. Crowley, who's got the first one, 1115.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah, and just for context, the violation reclassification is part of the larger bill and technical rules package. So there is some other unrelated changes in this draft here. Most of those other changes are really minor technical things. A few are substantial, but in this draft, we'll pretty much just be focusing on the violation reclassification and then some of the minor changes. There's a couple of rules that have more substantial proposed amendments, and those we'll be bringing back to the Rule Advisory Committee next week to discuss those substantial changes. So yeah, in terms of flow, we'll go through the violation related changes, and then assuming we have time, we'll circle back up to the top and run through some of the other technical changes. That being said, yeah, to kick it off, 1115 denial criteria. We've done a few things here. One is adding a denial criterion to make it clear that a licensed premises needs to be in Oregon. We've moved a couple of denial criteria from the must deny section of the rule down to the may deny section of the rule, just to allow for greater flexibility when dealing with edge cases. And then we've added denial criteria related to diversion and inversion, mirroring language from ORS 475C 265, as well as one related to persons who were producing presumptive marijuana under an ODA hemp license. And just for context, that presumptive marijuana finding is not somebody grows hemp that's 0.4%. It's the threshold for that presumptive marijuana finding is 5% total THC for mature plants. So it's not just the slightly hot hemp issues. And then finally, the last piece that we've changed here in terms of adding criteria is adding a may deny basis for being co-located with a psilocybin license. And then made a slight tweak to the relevant convictions denial basis, which removes non-compliance with driver license requirements from being a relevant conviction that the commission would consider. I know that was a mouthful. Any feedback on any of those changes?
Yeah, so this is Jesse from the CIA. Real quick, just a notice on what is it? 2L seems to carry, like, I can't tell if there's that has introduced into the marijuana industry, and then there's a second L on page 3, has operated as a hemp grower. Those are both tagged as L. I'm guessing they're two separate. And then my question is under DB, there is the co-location of at the same location as a producer, retailer, processor, or laboratory licensee, unless dun 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 dun. My question is there's lots of rule changes about changing location, it seems like. And so I'm just curious, are you just reorganizing things, or are there substantive differences? And you could address, I have that same question for the other license change or thing. So I'm just trying to maybe combine them all into one place.
Yeah, so the down in 2B, at the same location as a producer, retailer, lab, basically at the same license as another license of the same type or under different ownership. That's an existing denial basis that has been a must deny. This is just moving it down to a may deny. So if there's really extreme edge cases where there is a reason that we would want to allow a license to be issued at the same location as another license of the same type or another license under different ownership, this gives that flexibility.
I had a kind of related question. I believe it's been also prior policy, you can't co-locate producer licenses, even if you have identical ownership. Has there been any change in that? Or is the agency still staying with folks can't co-locate producer licenses on the same lot, even with identical ownership?
Right, yeah, this draft hasn't contemplated any change in the producers on a tax lot. It's sticking with the, you know, if there are multiple producers on a tax lot, they have to be under diverse ownership.
Thank you.
And there's one additional change to 1115. We remove non-compliance with driver's license requirements. Also, driving crimes are covered in the denial criteria, and we felt that, you know, stop signs and speeding violations really don't translate to whether or not you can run a business or not. And so we removed that from the criteria in 1115. So we'll go on to 1160. You want to start that one, Stephen?
Just Steve, one thing. Stephen Crowley mentioned that the presumptive is a 5% positive test. If we could actually just get that in the rule of what that definition is of presumptive marijuana, or the clarity would be helpful, because otherwise people will just, you know, be asking, what is it? What is it? What is it?
Yeah, and so the rule there references found to be presumptively marijuana under OAR 845-026-4100, and it's that 845-026-4100 spells out what constitutes presumptive marijuana.
Perfect. Thank you.
And then, yeah, for jumping into the next section, so for 1160 through 1180, there's some substantial changes that we'll discuss at the advisory committee meeting next week. But basically, it's just restructuring the changes from 1160, changes of business structure, changes of ownership, and changes of location were all within 1160 that made it a little bit unwieldy. So each of those have been given their own section, and there'll be some potential changes within those actions, but those aren't what we're focusing on this week. We'll have some, make sure the language is all nailed down and bring that for the advisory committee meeting for next week.
Oh, Stephen just kind of briefed through that, but we'll talk about the categories for 1160. There's a definition there. Does anybody have any input on the categories for 1160?
So under violations of 1160, it says a violation of section 1 or 3 is a cat 3, and then cat and violation of 4 is a cat 4, but it doesn't mention section 2. So unless I'm missing something.
I'll check that out.
Section 2, it's specified within section 2. 2 said, you know, 2A is a cat 2, 2B is a cat 3.
Okay, so in there. Okay,
existing categories.
And then the only other thing is so under 3, this is about the reporting of theft. Licensee that must notify the commission in a manner prescribed as soon as reasonably practicable, no case more than 24 hours from the theft of marijuana items or money from the licensed premises. Again, you can't report a theft you don't know about. And so just, I think it should be at least 24 hours from becoming aware of the theft, if possible.
Can you give me the letter of that again, Jess?
So that is 3, bullet point 3, under 1163. So it's 1163.
Thank you. All right, we'll close out 1160. 1165 is change of business structure, cat 3. Any comments? Okay. I couldn't hear you well. You're really quiet, bud.
I thought the proposed categories for both 1160 and 1165 looked about right.
Okay. 1170 is change of ownership. That is a cat 1. Any input on 1170? Moving on to 1175, changing, altering, or modifying licensed premises. It's a cat 3. 1175, any comments? All right, 1180. Gotta find it in my notes. 1180 is change of location, Cat 2. Any issues with 1180?
Just one small thing under 1183, a licensee of laboratory licensing. It's supposed to be or.
All right, Amanda, you get that one?
Yep, and Stephen, looks like Stephen's writing it down too.
Okay. Financial and business records, 1200, Cat 2.
This was, so there's about 6 of the rules that I've heard from industry seem like we might want to talk about it more. This is one of them. It's frankly not I don't think it's a huge issue for industry, but there's a lot of different types of records that this says licensees are supposed to keep, including like HR documents for 3 years. A lot of licensees have some licensees have a lot of employees. Whether somebody keeps, the HR documents for everybody for 3 years, I kind of question whether that really belongs in the type 2. So I think a type 2 is appropriate for some of these, but not all of these. And I'm going to get the agency written comments on kind of where we suggest drawing a line and maybe breaking some of these out into a type 3 or a type 4.
I would like to doubly support what Will just said. I mean, this section gives me a lot of anxiety because, there's a lot of things, like it's very broad language, and there's a lot of potential to lose some of these records, and we all can see a clear reason for some of these being incredibly important for being able to calculate, financials and whether there was diversion or attempt to cover up diversion. But it just seems not necessary to have it be Cat 2, and I definitely agree with Will's assessment on that.
Okay.
Rich,
Go ahead.
Rich, I'd like to point out as you look at changing that, the 3-year time period is likely because of the statute of limitations for criminal behavior. So I'd kind of hope that the 3-year limit wasn't changed.
Okay. Going through these individually will take some time. Would you rather I hear from industry members on each exact one that you want to call out, Will, the 6, and then go around, or do you want to go through each one?
I'm for purposes of today, I'm fine leaving it where we are. I don't have the red line for you yet. I suspect I'll have the kind of industry hope for red line in the next day or two on these handful where we're going to propose changes. But the ones that seemed appropriate to me for type 2 are who's an applicant, ownership structure things. The things I propose dropping in type 3 or type 4 are the employee training records, HR records.
Okay.
That kind of thing. So I'm not even sure if I have the level of detail yet. If you wanted to try to get into each sub rule, and frankly, I don't want to co-opt the meeting today by doing that.
All right. So I'm going to, just because we have so many rules, I want to get input. I'm going to continue through, but I'll pick up the pace. 1215 standardized scales is Cat 3. Any comments? 1230 is licensed premises restrictions and requirements. It's a Cat 2 for 6, Cat 4 for 9, and 9A, Cat 5 for the rest of 9. Any input on 1230? $12.45 is signage, is a Cat 4. Any input on $12.45?
Wait, hold on one second. I'm trying to catch up. Which rule are we on right now? Sorry.
12.45 is signage, Jesse. Cat 4.
Okay.
1290, this is a clarifying by adding laboratory licensee, Stephen or Amanda.
So this wasn't part of the proposed rules, but it is something that I have had many conversations with folks about. You are changing number 11 under 1290 to around tours. One of the things that a lot of processors would like is the same ability to provide tours as producers. And so if that could be producers and processor tours, that would be a lot of people would deeply appreciate that.
Right. 1295. Any other input? I heard something. Must not have been that. 1295 Cat 3, that is local ordinances. 1300 is licensee prohibitions.
So one is just a little bit of my neuroses. Under 1E, there's maintain a noisy, disorderly, or insanitary establishment or supply adulterated marijuana items. Those just seem like very different types of things and maybe could be broken out into two different points or whatever the rule numbers. But the other question I have is, like, the maintain noisy, disorderly, or insanitary establishment seems like something left over from alcohol that was brought over and not super relevant to cannabis shops where you can't have public consumption. So if that isn't necessary, maybe get rid of it and just leave the supply adulterated marijuana items. And then G is sell marijuana items through a drive up or walk up window. I know that there's a ton of people who have adopted that during COVID, and because of thefts and other things and the continuation of COVID, would like to maintain that ability moving forward. And that is important to a lot of people, especially in Portland, where they've been beset by crime.
And I believe that's something that we will be bringing to the advisory committee next week, is some rule changes around drive up, walk up.
Yeah, we've had that discussion internally, Jesse, so I appreciate you bringing it up. Anything else?
This is one of the 5 or 6 that caught my eyes. It's probably appropriate for a little more nuanced breakdown. Currently, the proposal is to classify all of these as type 1 or type 2, which are super serious violations. And some of these, I suspect, would be more appropriate for a different categorization. Jesse said maybe we drop noisy, disorderly, and sanitary. I was actually going to suggest we drop those to type 3 or type 4. Similarly, giving somebody accidentally giving a prize, I kind of question if that deserves such a high violation type. This is one of the 5 or 6 that my industry cabal is going to request slightly revised categorization on some of these. I agree 1 and 2 is appropriate for some of these. I just think that some of them a little lower category might be appropriate.
All right, I will look at that. Sonny, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that if they're selling anything that's a food item, then that insanitary establishment would be covered under their food safety license. So I guess if they're only selling smokable, they might not be covered, but I think most retail stores have some sort of edible item that would mean that they also need a food safety license, and so it should be covered under that through our program as well.
Thanks, Sonny. All righty.
Just want to reiterate support for Will's points. This is definitely a place where I think there could be some movement down. And then I also I could not find a category for 1J for violations. And again, I might have just missed it, but that was just the only other thing I noticed.
All righty. 1330 is trade samples, Cat 3. Any input?
Cat 3 is great, or lower, 4, 5, 6. But just in general, again, there's been I've heard repeatedly from folks that they would love both a simpler system for samples and the ability to provide more samples, especially in relation to the number of strains or product lines that they're able to distribute. And so if 6 could become 12, that would probably make a lot of people very happy. And this just seems like a place where, you know, I know that there's been some negative actions in the past, but I can't imagine it was significant. So, and I personally know that people do lots of creative things to try and get around these because the limitations are just too constraining. And so you're not actually creating the outcome you want. You're getting perhaps a more Wild West thing because people are getting around it creatively using personal product and things like that. So strongly advocate for increasing the number of samples available to, that people are able to distribute.
All righty. 1360 quality control samples. We did that one. 1410 security requirements, Cat 3. Any input?
And just to confirm, everything that's a Cat 3 is available for
yes
the VOC program, right?
Yes.
Okay.
1420 alarm system. 1430 surveillance equipment.
You know, on all these, you know, I see it kind of the route you went, and frankly, it works from my perspective. The kind of how OLCC has been processing all these security type violations like cameras and little door issues and whatnot has been really appropriate since we rolled out that VOC program. And the kind of back and forth dialogue that is allowed with industry has really lowered people's blood pressure on this end of the conversation about getting that stuff just fixed and cleaned up. And I've got a lot of positive feedback from licensees on how that's working lately. So thanks for that.
Will. All right, 1460 is location and maintenance of equipment surveillance. Anything on that? 1470 is producer security requirements, Cat 3. Anything on that? 1600 state and local safety inspections, Cat 3.
Wait, 16.
Go ahead, Jess.
Sorry, what was that number?
1600.
Okay.
1620 general sanitary requirements, and maybe Sunny can look to see if they're duplicative for part of it. But that is a category 2. There was definitely some things in here that were kind of different, but anything on 1620?
Like the last one, this is one of the 5 or 6 where we'd suggest breaking some of these out where Cat 2 seems appropriate, and some of these where a lower violation type, might be appropriate. If a marijuana licensee must prohibit any individual from working who has an illness accompanied by diarrhea or vomiting. Obviously, if the licensee knows about that, they might do something. But in washing hands thoroughly, that's a type 2 violation. I can't imagine it gets charged a lot, but we just kind of like the severity to reflect the seriousness of the violation. And maybe if somebody has a no hand washing pattern in practice, maybe that's a more serious violation. But we're going to propose maybe breaking this out in 2 or 3 sets where some of this is type 2, some of this is type 3.
Okay. Any more input on that? I will star that one, Will.
This is Jesse just saying I agree completely with Will.
Amazing. Producer privilege, U2 peas in the pod. Privileges, producer privileges, prohibitions, 2020 Cat 1. We have always said that if somebody's outside their privileges, that it is a Cat 1. Any input on that? That hasn't changed.
So, yeah, and I know where the agency's coming from on that, and I've seen that charged a bunch. On this one, so producer privileges and prohibitions, wholesaler and retailer, those are the kind of the last three where we're going to get a proposal from industry to try to break it out, where the big things remain a Cat 1 and should be a Cat 1, but some of the smaller things that, just to flag for my mind, if a licensee purchases or receives more than 200 marijuana seeds, say they accidentally take 250, I kind of doubt, I don't think that warrants an immediate license revocation for it, accurately having perfect records in CTS. Everybody tries to do that, but I know it's very hard to actually in reality achieve that when you've got hundreds of thousands of transactions with some of these licensees. Licensee who accidentally accepts or returns items that are not eligible for return, I doubt the agency would actually try to cancel their license. So it's going to be a kind of a breakdown where we try to make that category violation actually track what I think has been OLCC's practice in these cases.
Thanks, Will. Anybody else on 2020? If you're not on screen that I can't see you, there's a raise your hand feature also. And I will do my best to listen or see what's going on. So 2025, same thing for micro tier processing privileges and prohibitions. It's a Cat 1. Is this another breakout, Will?
It probably should be. I didn't put it on my short list just because nobody's actually bent my ear on it, but I think it'd be the same. Yeah, assuming that we can identify the same kind of breakout that I'm going to propose above, it probably fall in the same category. But I frankly haven't heard any micro licensees into sure they are. I just haven't heard from them.
Okay, 2030 is licensed premises at producer. I've actually had a location where they built a residence inside the producer process after licensure, and so that wasn't covered. You can't have it before, but nothing says about adding it. And then obviously when you add a residence inside there, you have some constitutional issues with right to privacy if there's more than one or two people living in there. So that's why we added that in there. If there's any questions, it's one of those it actually happened kind of deals, and we're dealing with that now. So same thing on 2030 Cat 1 producer. Any input? Okay. 2050 recreational marijuana producers operating procedures. Cat 3. I don't see any hands. 2800 retailer privileges prohibition, Cat 2, Cat 2B, or Cat 3, depending on the violation. Any input on 2800?
As we're going through this, Rich, and I'm sorry, but we didn't have all the time in the world to digest this. So could we take a pause and you just sort of describe in your guys' minds the difference between a Cat 3, 4, and 5?
I have the definitions. The Cat 3, 4, and 5 is in the back of the rules. Do you have it? And I don't know if I printed it, but I need to find that, Jesse.
Sorry.
It's basically it's defined. It's defined in the rule. Stephen, could you find that for me real quick?
Yeah, my computer's going a little slow, but give me just 1 second.
While you guys are getting into that, this is one where I like that you broke it out, Rich. I think that's super helpful. I think we're gonna suggest that adding another layer or two to your breakout that would take things like the no pet food and the kind of the little ticky-tack things down to maybe a type 4. But I like kind of the way you broke it out here, and the ones where we're going to propose a little extra breakout. It's going to kind of track this format where we call out specific subsections that are less health and safety oriented for potentially a lower categorization.
We can put that on the screen, maybe, Stephen. Should go through that real quick. for folks. I'm sorry, I'm not as computer technical as Mr. Crowley.
Yeah, and Jason has put it in the chat, but yeah, category 3 are violations that create a potential threat to public health or safety. Category 4 are violations that create a climate conducive to abuses associated with the sale or manufacture of marijuana items. And category 5 are violations inconsistent with the orderly regulation of the sale or manufacture of marijuana items.
Thank you, Jace. Thank you, Stephen. I flagged 2800 as incoming well as some definition.
And to be clear, these, you know, these things where we have, these aren't upending the apple cart. It's just adding kind of more nuance around what you proposed.
2820 is retail operational requirements, Cat 3, and input on that. There was a question in the chat, Amanda. Could you read that? 2820, no input.
What, are you on 2800, Rich?
I went to 2800 is the one I flagged, thinking that you would have more input, Will. And to basically have more definition and more parsing out. And then 2820 is retail operation requirements.
That 3 seems about right.
And the question in the chat was on the record keeping items, is there a time for which these records must be kept on the premise? And so, Mary Ann, if you want to go ahead and elaborate on your question, you're more than welcome.
Sure, thanks, Amanda. It was just kind of a general, it was, I'm trying to keep up, but it was back on the producer side, how we have to keep the standard operating procedures updated, which of course we have them on premises, but then there was also the additional one of when you make changes, that has to be documented. So what is the time limitation? Do we have to keep that forever? Do we have to keep it for 3 years? Is it 12 months? Like, what's the time frame? Because over time, this is going to be fairly unwieldy.
Okay.
Thank you.
I will add that note. Thank you. All right, I'm going to keep going. I think Stephen and Amanda are noting for me. I put the asterisk there. Retailer premises 2840 Cat 1. It's basically license privileges that you can't have certain locations. Any input on that?
Hold on 1 second, sorry. Can we go back just to 2800 real quick? Sorry. The 2800H on the contingent on the purchase, the changes made to discounting of marijuana item. I just wanted to say thank you. I think that's much better language that was there before. I still don't understand why this could be a problem, but I think the language you guys have is better than what was there before. And I just want to say that's a good change. Thank you.
You know, a lot of people on this call are subject matter experts. I would say David, Stephen, Amanda, and they work hard and they listen to what you guys say and then have come up with some of that language. So it's really them that have done that work. So I appreciate it also.
Yeah, and Jesse, we'll discuss that further next week. But I think just to answer your question really quick about the not selling an item that you have to buy a non-marijuana item for is to get away from a $90 mason jar in free marijuana that would have no tax associated with it.
Okay. That's fair. No Washington, D.C. style.
We're trying to stay away from that model, Jesse. All right. You say something, Will, or did I miss it?
Just noting somebody's got their hand up. Ellie.
I just wanted clarification on you removing sell marijuana item at a nominal price for promotional purposes. So is there no like dollar amount that we can go to, or is it just open for whatever?
Jason,
and thanks for the question.
Looking into that issue if he's still on.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And just to remind everybody, we can talk about it a little bit now, but rather than spending a ton of time on it this week, we will talk about this rule in depth next week. it's part of what Stephen said in the beginning. A lot of the changes are kind of more for the other rack, so we can get through all the violations today. But yeah, we wanted to remove the nominal price because that does cause a lot of confusion for people. And we want to allow businesses to run as much as other businesses in the state as possible. So to be able to have, you know, programs where you get like a stamp card or something like that, we want to allow more so for that type of behavior and not have the the nominal price language, because that has been a pain, I think, for everybody.
The definition of nominal is where we want to clarify.
Yeah, because nominal can be different for anybody based on your income level, right? So anyway, so like I said, more to come next week on that rule.
And thank you for pointing that out too. 2840 is retailer premises, Cat 1. The input on 2840. 2860 marijuana retailers, consumer health and safety information, category 5, 2860. 3210 is marijuana processor and endorsements. That is a Cat 1.
It looks like Laura has a question as well. Laura?
Hi, I raised my hand. So on 3210, I just have a question. So we have that in the first thing, it's a category 1 violation, process anything you don't have an endorsement for. But wholesale licenses are entitled to process any item without any endorsements. And so I just am curious why the word processing can't be more specific to what the process is, because if a wholesaler is allowed to process any marijuana item, but a processor is only allowed to process what they have an endorsement for, then technically speaking, with the language as it is, they could be processing concentrates. And we know that they package concentrates and extracts, but processors aren't allowed to package outside of their endorsement. And so I just wonder why we can't be more specific about what the word processing means, mostly for safety. You know, who should be making these items versus packaging them. And I think that it's very broad when we only have the word process include everything, right?
So the term processing is defined up in the definitions in 1015. This draft isn't proposing any changes to that, so you'd have to look at the rules online to see that definition. But if we're looking at 3500, it's clarifying that wholesalers do not have the privilege to process. You know, processing marijuana by statute requires a processor license, except in the sort of small carve outs for producers doing micro tier processing or keef.
Okay. That wasn't my reading, but thank you for the explanation.
That's why Stephen is here. He's a walking encyclopedia. 3215 is processor privileges and prohibitions, Cat 1, 2, or 3, depending on where we're at. Big rule. Any input? You might have notes on this one, Jesse. 3215.
I'm trying to catch up, so running through everything. I
And we lost him.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button.
That's all right, buddy.
I will get with Will and submit any changes to this that we recommend as a unit, and we'll go from there.
So should I asterisk 3215, Will, as something that's going to have some changes, or Jesse?
Yeah, it sounds like some just small suggestions.
$3220 is general process requirements, Cat 3. Anybody have anything on 3220? We good, Jesse?
Mm-hmm.
3230 processor policies and procedures, Cat 3. $32.40 processor training requirements, Cat 3. $32.50 is cannabinoid. I'm horrible with that word. Edible processor requirements. $32.50 is a Cat 3. $32.60 is cannabinoid concentrate and extract processor requirements. That is Cat 1. $32.70 is CTS requirements for inhalable cannabinoid products with non-cannabis additives. Cat 2, $32.70.
I mean, this is one of the ones where I feel like there's a lot of maybe confusion or lack of understanding, and just might be a place where a Cat 3 might be helpful to people to not freak out, but I'm not gonna hang my hat on that.
Okay. $32.80 cannabinoid topical processor, Cat 2. Hearing none. $32.90 is a Cat 3. That is processors record keeping. Hearing nothing. 3300 is processing marijuana for medical purposes. That is a Cat 1.
It looks like we have a question in the chat from Sunny Sanchez. Sunny, would you like to ask your question in further detail? Okay, does anyone know the answer to Sunny's question? Licensees that handle cannabinoid products must be licensed under ODA ORS 616.706. Question, is there a rule violation on the OLCC side for failure to be licensed under ODA?
I believe that falls under the violations of state or local law.
Local law and ordinances one violation, which was a Cat 3.
Yeah, if you're making any food items in the state, you need to have a food safety license with ODA. That's just across the board.
Okay. Amanda, can you monitor the chat or somebody? I'm missing that. Trying to keep all these screens open. 3310, transfer of medical marijuana processing site inventory. It's a Cat 3. $3,500 is wholesale license privileges prohibitions. This is Cat 1. I don't know if this is flagged well.
Yeah, this is the last one
Yeah.
of the kind of license types where everything's grouped as type 1, where there are some what to me look like and to industry look like really technical little rules, like complying with the trade sample rules and the return of wasted product rules and in making sure everything's inputted accurately in CTS, which is obviously important, but and just when you're doing stuff at scale, it gets little violations happen. It's like somebody said the other day, bartenders break glasses. We have a rule saying don't break glasses, but when you're a bartender and you serve 1,000 drinks, a glass gets broken. So like those other ones, we're going to try to call out what appear to be more technical rules so that they're not immediately a type 1.
All right, I'll asterisk that. I did see a hand, but it disappeared or something.
Looks like Laura has her hand up.
Yeah. So I just want to agree with Will, but also state for the record that I think it's much needed that we are very clear on what the wholesale licenses have as privileges and prohibitions. So I'm so happy to see so much detail, but I do think that it would be better to kind of break up, you know, what is a Cat 1 versus a Cat 2 or 3. Like maybe not all of these deserve immediate loss of license, but again, thank you for doing this. I think it's going to help a lot of people.
All right.
The ad that it sounds like Stephen did or talked about earlier with flagging that not allowed to process or produce just because you have a wholesale license. I think there had been some fuzziness on what some folks were doing in that space, and like an appropriate clarification.
Good. 3510, this is micro wholesaler license privileges, Cat 1. Any input?
I would say that just if anything that we come up with on the 3500 would it be appropriate to carry over, like that would be the only thing to flag.
Just asterisk that one, that there may be incoming downgrades. 3600 is wholesaling marijuana for medical purposes. It is a Cat 1. Any input? This is next one is 5000, which is lab license privileges requirements, and it is a Cat 1.
Could you so if we're on 5000 right now, right?
Yes, sir.
Could you guys just go, this one is what is the change reflecting in this?
I'm not sure what you're asking, Jesse.
Oh, there's the added section of 2, and I just was curious where that was coming from and what it is you guys are addressing here.
You want to take that, David?
This is TJ Sheehy, Director of Analytics and Research with OLCC. I can touch on this. Jesse, this is going to relate to something we maybe will go over at the end, but it's another one of those bill and technical changes that we'll get into either later after we go through violations or next week. But at a high level, it has to do with audit testing and changes that are being made in that section. So that we can make sure that labs have a time period where they retain samples that they're testing so that we can cross-check with audit testing if desired.
Okay. And I saw that there were some labs invited to this. I'm just curious if any of them have any thoughts on this section.
Yeah, it looks like Max has his hand up. I believe he's with the lab. Max, we can't hear you if you're trying to talk.
He's still on mute, Max. There you go.
Guys hear me there?
Yep,
Yeah.
We can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So two things. Item 7 there, the verbiage of dispose of is contradictory to a rule a couple sections down where we can dispose of things according to the disposal rules. So I believe that should be taken out. And the other item was as far as maintaining samples. That's actually in the NELAC rules, so OHA in our testing requirements. So that should, I mean, it's great to have an OLCC rule, but I would also like to see OHA act on that when labs are not doing that for accreditation purposes.
Max, this is TJ with OLCC. Follow-up question. Do you know offhand the time period under the NELAC rules of what that is? Does that align with what we have here, or is it different?
I believe it's 30 or 45 days. I don't know offhand. We retain for 45 days. It may be 30, but I could find that out for you.
Any follow-up on that? Appreciate the comments. 5045 is laboratory tracking and reporting, Cat 3. There's some language changes, but the category is 3. Any input there? 5060 is laboratory transportation and waste disposal. Cat 4. $53.50 marijuana research certificate privileges prohibitions. That is a Cat 1. Another one of the operating outside your license privileges. 5500 is marijuana worker permit, Cat 3 or 4. $55.85 is required reporting of trafficked or unlawful employment of minors, which is a Cat 2, and there's a note for Amanda and Steve.
Yeah, just
We'll
a
get to you in
minor.
just a sec, Laura.
Yeah, minor technical note on this one. This rule is opening a separate rule package on the license moratorium and trafficking issues. So we have it here at this rack, but this won't be part of the bill and technical rules package. It'll go through as part of the license moratorium and trafficking rule package. Yes, Laura.
I just want to say that I think that should be a category 1, just by your definition. I think that it should be a higher category. Thanks.
Thank you.
This is Jesse. The only thing, and maybe the rules isn't in the right place, but would be beneficial in general to see is there's the required reporting, and it's to a law enforcement agency and the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission. Just if you guys are going to be producing any guidance directing people to what the right law enforcement agency is, or what that really means, and just providing as much guidance to licensees on how to do this properly, would be, and not just licensees, but card holders or permit holders would be, I think, really helpful. People want to be able to comply, and I just don't know. I don't think this would give them enough guidance on how to actually properly apply or stay in compliance. Sorry.
We're working, Jesse, on this as a new program within OLCC, and some obviously something we saw last summer in Southern Oregon on the illegal side. And so we're trying to bring this up, and I hear your point, and I will make a note that maybe we do a training bulletin on how to properly meet this rule. I'll take note of that. 5720 is Cat 3, labeling, storage, and security of pre-tested marijuana items. Any input? 5730, wholesaler coordination of sampling and testing, Cat 3. 5740, failed test samples, Cat 2. 5760, audit compliance and random testing is Cat 2.
So again, this is where, I try not to play outside of my expertise. So I just want to make sure that the labs that are on don't have any concerns or issues with this section.
And for the more substantial changes, other than assigning violation categories, we'll circle back and talk through that, time permitting. And if we run out of time, there's always the advisory committee next week.
Marijuana recalls, 5790. Stephen, you're on.
Yeah, so 5790, this is another one that we will circle back to as time allows and talk through. There's kind of a substantial rewrite of the recall rule here. But for this run through right now, the only piece that we're going to look at is the violation category.
It is a Cat 1, and there is a lot of There is a lot of rewrite on this. 7170.
Looks like Laura has a question or comment.
Oh, sorry, Laura. I was looking down.
Oh, it's okay. If we look at, sorry, can we back up to 5740 just for a second? I just wanted to make sure we're clear on fail the test. What does failing the test mean? Are we just talking about pesticides, water? Is it also for homogeneity? Is it all failed tests? Because sometimes like I make edibles, they may fail for homogeneity, but nothing else. Do you want this for all test failures? Is that what it is? Okay, cool.
Yes.
Yes.
Any compliance test failure.
Okay, cool.
This is TJ with OLCC. Also, just to point out that fail means sort of the dead end, right? Because there's some options for remediation and retesting under the OHA rules. So this would be kind of a final strike fail after any other options have been exhausted.
Well, and to be clear, the must store and segregate and label it to indicate it's failed. Those are all pieces for, well, it's going through the process. If it's failed and you're requesting reanalysis, this just means to keep that segregated and clearly labeled as having failed the test until you go through those other processes of remediation or remixing if remixing is allowed.
Right, and I think that is what we do now. I just wanted to make sure it was for everything. So thank you both.
All righty, we're doing pretty well here. 7170, packaging and labeling prohibited conduct, sets the violation penalty caps for various scenarios. We've had some internal discussions about changing this. Anthony's here today, but this definitely is some significant language. I can't tell you what a CAT is because it's just a fine and recall information. I don't know if you want to touch on this quickly, Anthony, or move on.
Yeah, I can quickly run through this. This is Anthony Galtoski, OLCC for the record. As Rich mentioned, we're just cleaning this up and making it a little bit more transparent. So essentially, we broke down the civil penalties into 3 buckets. And as Rich mentioned, there are no category violations for labeling violations. So big A is 50 per violation and $10,000 for routine violations. Then it escalates to big B, which is $50,000 for violations of 7030 subsection 2, which is essentially the rule that says a label cannot be untruthful or misleading or attractive to minors. And then the penalty cap and violation amount gets doubled if intentionality is found. And then big C is when things get a little bit more serious. Obviously, that is capped at $500,000. And these are things that pose a public health and safety risk. So an example of that may be an undisclosed additive in a vape cartridge that has harmed someone or can actually harm somebody, or an undeclared allergen that's on the label. And then lastly, there is a doubling provision in this rule. So if the violation has occurred within the same 2-year period, the relevant amount per violation cap will be doubled. Thanks, Rich.
And is the current limit $100,000?
Yes, that is by internal OLCC policy.
Right. Okay.
Laura, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify here are these proposed penalties post approval? So let's say you do get approved or you haven't even submitted it for approval. But let's say, what if you do get approved and a violation is found post approval? Are we clear here that this is not just if you haven't gotten it approved, but also if you have gotten it approved?
Yeah, the way this is written, it would cover pre and post approval. So let's say you had a non-compliant generic label that was never approved. Or if you did have an approved label and then you put something that was untruthful and misleading on it, it would cover the whole range.
Great.
Thank you, Anthony. I know that's a lot. 7,500 is seed to sale tracking CTS requirements, Cat 3. $7,520 are famous UID tags. Cat 2 or Cat 4, depending on the circumstances. We are working on batch tagging rules separately from this rack. TJ's been working on that, so look for that in the future. You have anything, Jesse? I heard a moan.
Yeah, just every time with the unique identification tags, there's always a desire for more flexibility and, you know, reduction of a requirement to use them in every way possible. But we'll get into that later, I'm sure.
We are working on that in a separate process with TJ to be on a separate rule, and we are moving toward batch tagging, so individual plants will not need a tag. So that is going to be done in the very near future. I don't know if TJ wants to talk about the time frame of that, just so that you folks know.
Yeah, TJ with OLCC. The time frame is TBD. As we described at the prior Rules Advisory Committee, any change in that rule would likely require a budgetary change, as well as a contract change. And so the actual implementation of the rule would be based on changes to both of those aspects. In terms of next steps immediately, we're planning on putting the rule that we talked about at that last batch tagging rack out for public comment, at least tentatively right now, scheduling for that to go out in December, and then taking it to the January commission meeting, not for adoption, but just so that our commission can you know, express pleasure or displeasure with what's being proposed, and then we can take it to the legislature in the upcoming session for the budgetary conforming changes.
Thank you, TJ. A lot of work there on that. As you guys know, when you have contracts and things, it's legislative change in funding. So I appreciate the patience and TJ's work on that. Seed to sale tracking, 7560 Cat 3 system notifications. 7570 seed to sale tracking cultivation batches, Cat 4. $75.80 is another one of those tongue twisters. Reconciliation with inventory, Cat 3.
This is Jesse from Orca CIA. I've brought this up, I think, on every rack I've been in where this rule was open. The 24-hour reconciliation is incredibly challenging for licensees to maintain. And if that was able to be extended out to once a week, that would be absolutely amazing for, you know, for folks. And I'll just leave it at that. But the extension of that out as much as possible is a very popular position amongst our membership.
Right, Jesse, thank you. 7590 seed to sale tracking inventory audits, and what I found when I read all of Division 25 is that this was the only commission may form a physical audit of the inventory of any licensee at the agency's discretion and with reasonable notice to the licensee, which has been removed. There are two other places that it does not require we can audit or inspect without notice. It kind of contradicted itself. And I'm not sure if it was because they thought a CTS, I wasn't involved in this, audit was maybe a different type of audit. But frankly, a CTS audit is the first thing we do when we catch somebody with product out of state. And I do not want to have to wait for them to get back and move stuff around, basically. And so this statute or rule will now align with the other rules that OLCC can show up and inspect. He always has the right to deny the inspection, but we have the right without notice. CTS may seem like, oh, that's just auditing, but like I said, that is the first thing we do when somebody's caught in Oklahoma with certain strains of product or packages. We get the names and locations or types and strains, and we start looking internally to see what's gone. And so that is why I changed that language. Trying to help a little bit more on our criminal side investigations, or not criminal side, but when our licensees decide to go out of state. Any input on that?
That makes sense. Question on the last one, something I've heard about as well, where Jesse flagged that 24-hour reconciliation rule. Do any of our friends from OLCC know if liquor has any sort of equivalent timeline for them reconciling their inventory?
So, well, I don't think it's the same. They don't have to reconcile their inventory. What they have to do is they're responsible for the alcohol, and once it's in their possession, then they're responsible for it. So there's no, I think we do audits, store audits of our liquor stores, but I think that's a totally different process.
Just to kind of back up what Jesse was saying, like, and I know the agency is making a ton of progress, even in this rulemaking on this, treating the cannabis industry more like other mature industries that have sensitive but not toxic products would be nice. And I don't know many folks that have a 24-hour reconciliation. That is hard when you've got, like, particularly on the retail side, where you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of products in that location.
I think
Just a
TJ
general
and
comment.
Tyler. Yeah, TJ then Tyler.
Yeah, just to clarify, this is TJ with OLCC. Just to clarify what reconciliation means, when we talk about reconciliation of inventory, we're talking about the activity that occurred during the day. So we're talking about reporting of sales, reporting of waste, things like that. And so that's, if you're accurately accounting for stuff that happened during the day, that is your reconciliation of inventory. I don't know offhand that we have any sort of affirmative requirement that you have to do a top to bottom audit of your inventory. I think that's where it comes into best practice of the licensees for the things that, detecting of theft or other variances that might happen where it's not a sale or something like that. I think that's where it's a little more up to the licensees for their sort of guardrails, so that when we come on site, what we want to know, as Rich said, is does the inventory and metric match what's on site?
But I will just say, TJ, me and you have gone back and forth on this a couple of times in the past.
What if I give you 25 hours, Jesse? How's that?
I will say, I think it is just the way it has been enacted or interpreted on the ground, and from some of our past communications together, I think that it is still incredibly onerous and could be done in a shorter time frame, or the time frame could be extended out without there being a problem. And if it's just making sure that transactions are in metric or something, there could be something like that, but it is still just very onerous, and how people are interpreting it is to the letter, and so they are doing things like, I know of a shop that weighs all of its jars every night to account for moisture loss on top of sales. I know people who are tracking every ounce of trim waste and other things that they go through as they do intake on things. There's just a ton of work around the reconciliation as people are interpreting it. And so if the problem is that it means something less than what people are interpreting as, then let's provide more clarity on it. But, it is a very big hurdle, especially if you're doing something like a wholesaler might be, might take in 10,000 products in a day. It is a massive operational cost to folks. And I think most people think they're not doing it because are not doing it right, and don't feel like they have the ability of doing it right in the time frame without spending spending so much money. They just would not be able to stay in business. So it's it is. I haven't talked to a single business that doesn't have a problem with it.
Tyler,
Your point, TJ, it is you might need to do a physical count audit of everything each night, and I think folks kind of feel like to follow this thing to the letter. That's what it's asking for, but I don't think that's really, I mean, the cost of that to count everything every night. You know, it's a number of employees for hours. It's just, there's some balance there that we haven't found yet, I guess.
Maybe it's the definition of reconciliation. Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, so I can appreciate both Will and Jesse's both goals of treating cannabis like and marijuana licensees like any other mainstream business, and I appreciate the costs associated with it. And frankly, every time it comes down to saving retailers money or licensees rather money, I think it's better for keeping people in the regulated market, because when you spend too much money, you get desperate and you do desperate things. That being said, I don't think we can compare this to alcohol, because alcohol is controlled by OLCC coming into the retailers, and then there's not a huge illicit market for alcohol. So I don't think drawing parallels there is necessarily appropriate. I think a good compromise, though, to what I need for when people enter the illicit market, and that reconciliation to be current, and a cost saving is maybe if it's not just reconciling everything within 24 hours, but maybe waste has to be reconciled within 24 hours. Maybe the subject matter experts at OLCC can drill down and separate out, what has to be reconciled in 24 hours and what doesn't have to be, and maybe extend some of those to bring down the labor costs.
Laura?
Tyler, I totally agree with you. And I know I added something in the comments, but on a side note, I wanted to say perhaps there could be some kind of mitigating factor here where maybe they didn't get to reconcile it within that time, but once it is reconciled, if it's the same as their records show, maybe this could be a lesser violation. Because I think what we're really trying to parse out here is, did they have an employee call out, or did something happen that they weren't able to reconcile within that time period? Because it is a super tight time period for retail shops. It's not something we run into as processors as much. But I do think that, making those changes will keep people more compliant.
Bill, did you have anything else?
I'm just glad we got this discussion. It is something that's a real burden on folks, and if we can come up with a better definition, it's not parsing that lets OLCC feel in control and know that the numbers are right, but doesn't dump thousands and thousands of dollars costs. That would be great. The most analogous industry to my mind might be pharmaceuticals, like pharmacies, and that's they're all private operating folks, and I don't know how often they have to do a physical inventory reconciliation, but it's probably not 24 hours, and I think it's something that would be good to have more dialogue on, to try to make sure there's controls there, but it's not pushing folks out of the legal market.
Okay. Well, thanks for the input on that. I'm going to skip ahead to 7700, which is transportation and delivery of marijuana items. Cat 1, 3, or 4, depending on the violation. Any input on 7700? $77.50 is everybody's favorite, waste management. Cat 3 violation. Any input on 7750? 8040 is advertising restrictions. Cat 5 violation. 8060 is advertising media coupons and promotions. Cat 5. 8080 removal of objectable and non-conforming advertising. Cat 5. 8500 responsibility of licensee responsible for conduct of others. That is Stephen and Amanda.
Yeah, and this one is just another rule where we're adding laboratory licensees along with other licensees to the rule.
Okay. 8520 is a Cat 3 prohibited conduct. Hearing nothing there. 8540 is dishonest conduct, false statements. We added a Cat 3. There's several different levels of violation, or a Cat 2, excuse me, 1 and 2 for dishonesty.
Try to get that. I think that's an excellent idea. I know we've talked about it in these racks before in another context. Trying to differentiate between, you know, an owner applicant trying to hide information or misrepresent something to the agency. That's absolutely appropriate for the most severe sanction, in my opinion. But when you have an employee that might have just gone completely rogue, to hang that on the licensee is a pretty brutal context. So having a little differentiation between type 2, type 3 here is appreciated.
Thank you, Will. 8560s inspections, Cat 2, fail to cooperate. This is one of the other rules I mentioned earlier when it says when you can and can't. 8570, unified standards. You want me to go back, Jeff?
Yeah, just on 8560. So we're adding in failure to cooperate with the commission during inspection as described in this rule is a Cat 2 violation.
We charged it in the past also.
Yeah. I just, if there is, like, I think we've talked about this, what failure to cooperate means. Because there's like, is waiting to talk to a lawyer failure to cooperate? Is, you know, some of these things where I think people have gotten, you know, where, you know, I think it's, especially if there's not a informed PIC person in charge on site, employees may do things that where they're feeling like they're going to get violated by the OLCC and fired by their employer, not knowing what is actually complying, what their rights are in this situation. And I understand the need for you guys to be able to do an inspection, but I also think that people, you know, what exactly it is, what is required for people to be cooperative and what their rights are and where the lines are is helpful for people to understand what their responsibility is, especially permittees. And so as much clarity as possible in this section would be helpful, and or providing guidance to it. And I think, you know, there being some clarity on, you know, pausing for 15 minutes or something while they gather their heads is not a failure to cooperate.
Okay.
Really quick, Rich. Tyler
ahead.
Bechtel with OSP. To Jesse's point, there has never been a licensee that's an employee of a licensee that's allowed us in as law enforcement when we asked without stopping and calling someone, a boss or whatever. Oftentimes, we'll be 30 minutes down the road. We'll get a call from a person with some kind of power asking us to come back. But I mean, that could be construed as failing to cooperate. And really, it's an employee covering their butt.
Yeah, Jesse and Will and a couple other folks know that I've been reading all the compliance reports in the last, I would guess, a little over a year. And the only ones that I have seen are the ones that they have said, go away, you're not coming in, we're never letting you in. Those are the type of violations. I have not seen anything similar to, hey, 30 minutes, or hey, I want to call a lawyer, or my regional boss told me to call him. I have not seen those charged. And your point, I've made some notes, Jesse, on clarifying that. And we have been told to go away, so. Then I don't think it'll be the last. That's a bedside manner, I guess. I don't know. 8570 uniform standards for minor decoy operations, added a Cat 2 for failure to return minor decoys ID. I know that seems pretty serious, but you have to recognize that we're using minor decoys now. They're employees of the agency. We're getting out to do more minor decoys, but if they will not return that person's legal driver's license, then there's no reason for having minor decoys if they hold on to it. So we're serious about that one. So I'm sure there's some input, but what we're doing is we are, just so everybody on the call knows, we are using minor decoys and we're getting out there again. And we've had some very, very low compliance on a Eugene liquor was 35% compliance rate last week. So we are going to do some public engagement with our licensees about making sure that they are mindful about ID. This isn't a get you. We want people to be 100%. 8590 is the sanction schedule. That's where the definition is, and then the chart. The chart has some changes to it. You will see that the standard has changed a little bit. I removed the producer section and put it in the notes. One of our issues with producers is if you are not convicted, but if you plead to a charge in January, you're an outdoor grower, you take your penalty of a 30-day suspension, there's actually nothing that will affect you. And then if you're actually, say you're an indoor grower in July and you have a crop going, we would rather be able to switch the penalty to all cash payment, basically, so that they can continue to operate and it doesn't affect their business. The one thing that I did add on all violations is the or section, where somebody can get a fine or closing. What I found is a 30-day closure or even a 10-day closure for a retail business is a death sentence for operating their business. And so what the whole idea isn't to close the business down, not to mention the employees that work there. We wanted more flexibility in how we define whether somebody gets a fine or a suspension days. And so that is why that has changed for flexibility. That's basically how we move through that. And in the rule, it's $250 per day, except for 2Bs, which is 165, and so it comes out a little bit different in the math. But basically, that's the standard. If you look at, like, if somebody gets like 6 category 5s in a 2-year period, it says revoked. That would refer you straight to the lack of institutional control statute. Basically, doesn't mean you may or may not be suspended or revoked, but we will look at it in totality. And then that rule that we just enacted would allow us to maybe allow you to continue to operate with a control plan, basically on things that you have to do to stay in business. So we're trying to be a little more flexible in the totality of how we deal with the businesses. The mitigation factors, I've heard a lot about mitigation factors. The things that have changed. I'll start with how we do mitigation. We've always used a standard 30% reduction in penalties during the settlement process. It was never written down, but it's what we did. We changed, we added in the mitigating factors and added a percent reduction to that. And I changed B to cooperation instead of in extraordinary cooperation, and meaning that we want the licensees to cooperate with us. We also added a F where the licensee or applicant was not personally involved or where the violation occurring. This mitigation factor reduces by a total of 10%. But if it's a repeat offense, it doesn't qualify. So if you have all the first mitigation factors, it's your first violation, you may be able to reduce your penalty or suspension up to 50% if you don't have any aggravating circumstances. Though if you have aggravating circumstances like you were warned for the violation, then you may not get that. So there's a possibility of the 30% reduction and then all the aggravating circumstances getting you back up to 100%. But if you do everything right, you can, on a first time offense, you can reduce that to 50% on your first violation. This isn't about penalizing or suspending somebody. It's about making sure that we're correcting the behavior and working with our licensees. The step for the commission to add section F is a big step in ours. We've always had the licensee being the ultimate responsible person, but what I've seen is the example I will use when I explain this to commissioners and Director Marks is you have an employee that's been trained in how to check ID and all the processes and safety measures are in place, but he decides that he's going to sell to his buddies and use somebody's medical marijuana ID number to save them tax money. The licensee has nothing to do with it, doesn't condone it, fires the employee afterwards. And so that would allow mitigation on the licensee's part because they've done everything possible to stop that violation. Now, if it happens again, that wouldn't count, but that's how we've done that. So the percentages are taken off at the start and the beginning of the sanctions and percentage, and then everybody knowing exactly what category everything is. Once we're through with this rulemaking, we will make a chart of all the violations in Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3, Cat 4, Cat 5. Everything will be on Front Street for all licensees and everybody to know exactly what's going on. There's one more thing that I wanted to talk about before we get through 8590, 8760. It's a letter for licensee in good standing for use by other jurisdictions for licensing. You know, it's complex because we have our own licensing standards for good cause in another section of the statute. I know Will has some input. My language was just a start. I expect that you guys will give us some input on what you would like there, but it's a, you know, if somebody had a category 4 or category 5 violation 2 years ago, there's no reason that they shouldn't be licensed. And one of the things that I thought about is we're trying to make it as close to possible. If we would relicense you or we wouldn't take your license away from you, then how do we produce a document for a licensee that would show that they're licensable in Oregon? And so I'll open it up to comments on 8590 and 8760.
So on, thank you, Rich. And I flag 8760, something that I in industry.
Well, I can barely hear you. I don't know if anybody else is having that problem.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. 8760 is something that industry has talked about a lot. I actually have draft letters from, or not draft, final letters from OCA and CAA on this, where Oregon licensees are getting held back in other states simply because of how they do their licensing. For example, a number of California jurisdictions have point systems where it's, they've got a limited number of licenses and they're going to score all the applicants from a scale from 0 to 100. And they will automatically say that if you served a suspension in Oregon, for example, you lose 5 points in your competitive application. And in a number of those jurisdictions, you need to score a 97 or a 98 to get that license. It's something that I think they're doing to kind of have local preference to try to, basically ding the folks coming out of Oregon and some other states that have been operating a little longer to basically prefer their local people. So the route we're asking for, and this is something that several commissioners asked for at the May commission meeting when Rich, you were sick and Steve filled in, is something that if it's an old violation and it's not intentional, that it can be dropped basically from folks' records. The path that I think there's 2 paths that can actually get there within the statutory framework and the rule setup that OLCC has. One is that a lot of these relate just to suspensions. So that if a licensee took a suspension 3 years ago for, some non-major violation, that they can elect to also pay the fine. So, when the notice of violation comes out and it says you can serve a 10-day suspension or pay a $5,000 fine, they might have elected to take that suspension, particularly if it was a producer. And they would love to pay, now it's 3 years later, pay the fine and then have OLCC just update its records to say the fine was paid in lieu of suspension. The second route for folks, for these jurisdictions that just say any violation, is a purely just OLCC having a purely discretionary system that says if an applicant requests, 3 years after the fact for a non-major violation, request that it be dropped to a warning, that OLCC will consider dropping it to a warning if it was a not major fine and they haven't had any, problems since then with that flavor of violation. And really could put any sort of subjective criteria around that you want, that it was not a major health and safety violation and anything else. But just basically OLCC has any sort of process where folks can say, hey, I had this violation years ago. It was not major. I'd like my record to reflect that OLCC has changed it to a warning. That would be another route for kind of these jurisdictions where licensees are getting largely disqualified for taking past violations that weren't anything too serious.
Well, when you say change it to a warning, like in our record, or would we, we've already entered in the order that they paid a fine or suspension. So we would flip that into our records, and then they already paid the suspension. So it's just after 3 years, it just flips to a warning in the records. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. And it could be an update or amendment to the records or whatever. And the record, you could keep the fact that it was originally classified as a violation, but because of whatever review under OAR 845-025-8760, the agency has decided that a warning is actually more appropriate in light of not being a bad actor for 3 years or whatever kind of subjective review you care to do or not do. And it's the kind of thing that obviously 90% of licensees would never care about. It just matters to those folks who find themselves competing in other jurisdictions to try to get a license. And this relates to keeping Oregon's competitive advantage in this young industry. And Oregon should be a hub. When federal barriers come down, Oregon should be a hub. Either Portland or Southern Oregon should be an industry hub like Milwaukee is for beers and St. Louis is for beers. You've got a lot of competitive advantages. And this is something that could help the state grow more jobs over the long term if there is some sort of release valve for these historic, not major violations.
In my experience, thank you, Will, for going into this. It is a really, really important issue. I know it has hindered people from getting investment dollars because people don't want to be attached to a thing that could hurt them down the road in other states because they have grand ambitions. And it is just a really, like as Will said, it doesn't affect everybody, but for those it does affect. It is really important to them. And as Will articulated, our vision is not that Illinois moves into Oregon, but that Oregon moves into Illinois, and this can be an impediment from our ability to do that. So as much as possible, I think the other thing if I remember correctly, the VOC was not retroactive to people who had already settled, right? And so this is sort of in what Will's describing to me is also sort of in that same frame of recategorizing things that would be a Cat 3, 4, or 5, or down as an opportunity, basically turning into a warning is essentially kind of similar to the VOC program today. So I think it would be really beneficial to folks to be able to have that. And then the only other thing that I'm curious about, and I don't think it might not be something we can do in rules and we might have to do statutorily, but is being able to categorize things, non-serious things, as in such a way that it wouldn't have to be reported in other states because it didn't count as a violation. And so it's might just be a linguistic fix if that is possible, but I think that might be a bigger issue. But definitely want to double down on saying everything Will has said is things that I have heard and have advocated for as well, and a big supporter of those changes to the greatest degree possible. Is really important. On the other thing, on the mitigating factors, obviously, Rich, we've talked about it like 6 times, and want to say, so we're just for the record, we're moving from 30 to 50% total ability of mitigation, which is great. It's amazing. As much as possible, if there is space for further mitigation, that would be amazing. The 10% for a permit, I guess my question is we've been moving towards, being able to hang a violation on a permittee over a licensee when appropriate, as in, the licensee is doing everything they properly can, proper training, proper standard operating procedures, proper reporting, but somebody still goes rogue. And I'm guessing, I'm just trying to clarify, is the maximum protection 50% in that case for a licensee? So like if a permittee, let's say, knowingly sells cannabis to a minor despite everything, or some other violation that was conducted by the permittee against the wishes, instructions, and training of the licensee, is the maximum protection that licensee gets at 50% if they do all the mitigation properly?
Yes, on a first time offense, yes.
Okay. Well, I would say if there was a permittee involved, it would be nice if it was more than that, and also if it was less than 2 years, like that it could happen maybe once every year or something like that, because just there's a lot of employees and there's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong. So I understand we can't just create the Wild West, but a little bit more leniency when it comes to the actions of a permittee would be a nice addition. So if it's shortening it from 2 years to 1 year or less, that would be good. And if it was able to increase beyond the 10%, that would be nice as well.
I hear you.
That being said, huge improvement. Amazing. Thank you.
Anybody else?
It looks like Ellie has a question. I just kind of wanted to expand on what Will said. Ellie Niles with Nectar. When going into other states, we not only have to report past violations, no matter how big or small, and there are states that dock you for these violations. And so it would be great to have some sort of program to potentially expunge, depending on the severity of the violation, just being able to remove that and move forward in other states.
Is there usually, can you guys help me? Usually, is it the 2-year window, the standard nationally, or is it all over the place? Some 2, some 3, some 5. Is there some type of standard that we see in most states?
On that disclosure, most states make you go all the way back.
All the way back? Okay. And Will, is it warnings or formal violations or everything?
In some jurisdictions, it's just suspensions, and in some jurisdictions, it's suspensions and violations. I'm not sure if anybody makes you give warnings, report warnings or not. My guess is some, just because there's getting to be so many different jurisdictions. And California, it's actually driven locally. So you can have 50 different cities.
Different rules. Okay. I just didn't know that, the one thing I heard from you today is that they view suspensions more than a fine. And, that seems weird to me because our rules they're synonymous, but they're not interpreted in that way. So I could see how that could be biased toward our licensees.
in some jurisdictions, they're synonymous, and in some jurisdictions, they focus on suspensions. Don't know
Okay.
why.
Thank you. I think we're done with my section, Amanda.
All right. So I think since we have the time, let's give everybody a 5-minute break to recuperate, and then we'll circle back to the top and go through the other technical changes that are in this draft. So we'll be back here around 11:01. All right. So a lot of the rest of these, as I mentioned at the top, are really minor fixes. Some of it just kind of standardizing formatting for administrative rules, a little bit of renumbering sections. So I'll run through rules with only really minor changes pretty quickly, but I will stop. If anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in or comments, and then I'll stop when we do hit sections with more substantial changes. But starting back from the top, 1115, there's a place where we've renumbered a reference from 1160 to 1165, which is where the change of business structure rule is moving to. Other than that, it's just correcting terminology around subsection versus section. 1160 through 1180, those are substantial changes, but they're more licensing related than violation related. So we'll be packaging those up for discussion at the advisory committee meeting next week. We'll skip through those today. Let's see, next technical change is in 1215, and this is just formatting on referencing chapters and divisions. 1230, I think, is the next one that has substantial changes that we will be talking about today. And so there's two changes in 1230. One is to add laboratories into section 5 of that rule. Currently, that rule allows wholesalers and wholesalers and processors to have multiple non-contiguous enclosed spaces as part of their licensed premises with an unenclosed area in between. This would just expand that to allow laboratories to do the same thing. And for example, as the new testing rules start coming online, heavy metals are starting next year. If a laboratory needs additional space for additional equipment to run these tests, this would allow them to have, two enclosed areas with a unenclosed but licensed space in between that they could transport samples along. And then the other change in this rule is to the producer tours, substantially streamlining it so that basically just the members of the tour group need to sign in on the daily log. Any feedback on those two? I know we got the previous comment that processors would also appreciate the ability to do tours. All right, moving on. 1130 and 1160 both use a newly defined term, hemp cannabinoid product. That's in the new definitions that'll go to the Rule Advisory Committee next week. And then the other changes are just standardizing formatting conventions. 2020 and 2025 have some technical amendments clarifying that producers cannot process other than as explicitly allowed under their license privileges. So micro-tier producers with that concentrate processing privilege, and all producers are able to process keef. Next technical amendments to talk about are, let's see, the ones in 2800, we said we would bring those back up next week for further discussion on the discounting rule. So 2840 is the next one. This change would make things simpler for delivery-only retailers in that they would no longer have to designate a consumer sales area if consumers are never going to be allowed in the licensed premises. Any feedback on that one?
Stephen, it looks like there's a question from Marianne in the chat about the definition of tour as opposed to visitors.
So visitors, I'd have to look back up. There is a I believe visitors has to do with people performing work on the licensed premises. That is not an area that I am, permitted visitors. So I'm looking at 1230, section 10. The general public is not permitted in limited access areas on a licensed premises except for the consumer sales area of a retailer. In addition to licensee representatives, the following visitors are permitted to be present in limited access areas on a licensed premises, subject to the requirements of the rules. Laboratory personnel, contractors, vendors, or service providers, other licensees or other licensee representatives, invited guests, which is defined in 845-025-1015, and then tour groups. So tour groups would be guests that don't fit into that definition of invited guests in the definitions in 1015. And just to close the circle there, invited guests means family member and business associates of the licensee, not members of the general public.
It looks like Max has a question or comment.
Yeah, I kind of missed the very beginning of that, but are laboratories included in the tour group licensee types? Are we allowed to give tours to the general public?
David, do you want to take that one?
I'm looking right now. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't believe so. I think it was explicitly for producers, is my recollection. I'm pulling it up now though, because it talks
Well, I
about.
remember David too.
Yeah. I think it's something we could definitely look at.
Yeah, we would appreciate that. We have a lot of interest, and you know, there's a lot of interest in safety and public health and that sort of thing. So, thank you.
This is Jesse. In relation to, what are we doing here? 2843C. Is that to clarify for people like who are delivery only? And or is that also connected to the potential of people just doing walk up / drive through in the future?
I think, yeah, all of the above. Any retailer that is not allowing consumers onto the licensed premises, whether that's delivery to a residence or, and like we mentioned, we'll be bringing some language clarifying drive up, walk up, curbside delivery to the Rural Advisory Committee next week. All right, moving on. 3210 has some changes that are, again, just formatting conventions. 3220 does have, 3215 clarifies that processors can't produce marijuana, can't grow and harvest marijuana. And then also allows the total inventory transfer to a wholesaler, similar to what's in place for other licensees under the transfer privileges of a processor. Depending on what type of material and who they received it from, it may not be necessarily eligible for transfer directly to a wholesaler. But if a processor needs to move all of the inventory from their premises, this would allow them to pick up and move everything to a licensed wholesaler. 3220 has one conforming amendment with a new rule that's not in the draft here that we'll be talking about next week. And then also adds in some language that basically requires that the processor making any non-medical grade edibles must meet the scoring requirements in Division 26 for those products. there are already some limits on, products that don't meet those scoring requirements can't be sold to consumers. But this would give processors a responsibility there too, that they are not transferring non-medical edibles that don't meet the scoring requirements to a retailer. The next several here are just formatting convention changes in 3250, 3260, 3270. Let's see, 3300 is just a update of, there was still a section in there that referenced the old labeling rules under OHA's Division 7. Those rules are now in OLCC rules, so just updating that reference. 3500 is mostly formatting conventions, but also adding in that clarification that a wholesaler licensee does not have the privilege to produce marijuana or process marijuana. 3510 is just formatting conventions. 5000 is the next substantial change here, and that one is requiring the sample retention and allowing additional agencies to request sample material. So we touched on that a little bit our first run through, but yeah, just requiring that samples be retained so that if OLCC or other relevant agencies need to request some of that sample material, that it's available.
Is that a new authority for you guys to be able to access that, or has that always been there?
This is TJ with OLCC. I think when it comes to labs, a lot of it is in statute. There's this bifurcation between licensees and laboratory licensees, and so I think what we've discovered in our rules is it talks about licensees. When we think, originally we thought of that as a broader term, but it's actually specific. And so this is really more an exercise in clarity, really, so that we can make sure that everyone's on the same page.
But I guess I'm just trying to dive into if this is also part of, if there is going to be a state lab or not, or, is this about also helping to ensure, and don't think I'm trying to go down a bad place, because there has been a huge demand for improvement in testing from a huge number of our members, and so including some of our lab members. So if that's where this is going, that's great. I just am trying to understand if this is part of a conversation around increasing authority to be able to do end product testing and more lab, and sort of more accountability for labs.
TJ again. The short answer, I think, is yes. But there are some things that are not possible without statutory changes. So this, what we're going to talk about later is in the context of the audit testing rule and what us and the other agencies have authority for now and resources for now. And it's also contributing to or part of the conversation that's going to be hopefully taking place during the next legislative session around reference lab and an increase in resources for the agencies to address what you're talking about.
All right, moving on, 5045 has some formatting convention changes, and then just adding hemp certificate holders and research certificate holders to the tracking and reporting that labs do in CTS, which is already standard practice. This is another one of these changes that's more for clarity than an actual substantial change from what's currently happening. 5060 is just formatting conventions. 5350 also formatting conventions. And there was one section that just referenced enforcing ORS chapter and didn't specify which chapter, so adding in that's in reference to chapter 475C. 5500, this one is a change that was required by some legislation, adding the worker permit requirement to lab employees. So all the worker permit requirements that everyone's familiar with for other licensees will also apply to laboratory licensees. I believe, was that effective January 1st?
I believe so.
This is Max with SD Labs. My understanding is the intent behind that is to be able to hold laboratory employees accountable from an OLCC perspective, which I agree with and appreciate. However, the initial reason it was left off, which may be common knowledge or may be forgotten, was that much of our staff are academics or wanting to get into the field of academia or government positions, government science. And there's been instances in this state and other states of folks not being able to get federal approval to work due to having, some sort of cannabis certificate, like license or certificate on their record. Has that been thought of? Has that been considered in this new rule?
Max, I can kind of give you a little bit of background. So one of the main reasons that this legislation even came up was we were audited a few years ago by the Secretary of State's Audit Division. And one of the main audit points in that and concerns from their office was that there was no sort of like licensure for lab employees. And so it kind of played into the whole concern about oversight of labs. But that was one of the things that they recommended that was changed at a state level. And so a lot of this came out of that audit.
Yeah, like I say, I agree with it in principle. It's just, it's tough when, you're trying to move on from this and get a government grant or something, and they say, oh, you have an Oregon handler's permit, and sorry. So it's a bit of a dead end, I think, either way. So I just wanted to make that clear, just point that out.
Thanks. Next couple are just formatting changes in 5720 and 5730. 5740 has some clarifying language that we kind of touched on earlier about for failed test samples, just requiring that they be retained and stored in a clearly labeled manner and not transferred without OLCC permission. Next substantial change here is 5760, which I believe TJ will take the reins on.
Yeah, I'll jump into that. Jesse, I think we're getting a little bit of feedback from your mic, if you wouldn't mind muting. So there's a few cleanup items in 5760 and then one new substantive concept that I want to cover and talk about. So one, as we discussed earlier, it incorporates laboratory licensee into this rule. So not only can we request material from wholesaler, producer, retailer, those types of licenses, we can also request it directly from a laboratory licensee. And then one cleanup item, we can also have that tested by more than one laboratory. So we can do what we call round robin testing to cross-check results among a series of labs rather than one individual lab. Sub 3 is sort of cleaned up a little bit to make it clear what we can test for and who we can test with. And then 4 is where we get into the substantive concept change. So I'm actually going to share my screen real quick. So this is sort of a visual illustration of what this rule is doing. Just taking a step back and describing sort of the impetus for this at a high level. One, we're well aware of the financial incentive to get high potency scores and the issues that introduces into the marketplace. Two, we have an audit testing program. We've had it, I think, since the beginning of these rules and then expanded it during E-Valley for more public safety considerations. And so those have all contributed to things like recalls and other sort of public safety concerns in those ways. What we don't have is a consequence if we find a significant difference in the audit testing sort of spot check versus what the original compliance test was, unless we were to actually find cause on the lab side where it was fraudulent or something like that. But those are very, very difficult cases to make no matter what state you're in. So the concept here is, instead of only sort of going after a lab with outright fraudulence, shifting the incentive structure from getting really high results on your label to get shelf space to having more of a focus on accuracy of results for the consumers. And so what this would do is enable us, whether it's getting it directly from the lab or getting it at the batch at the producer or processor level, or even down at the retail level, shelf audits, is conducting testing where we can see whether there's a statistically significant difference in what we would call round robin testing, so with a series of labs compared to the original compliance test. So this is a visual example of 4 samples, and you can see over on the left-hand side, the bar here is the original compliance result, and then the dots are individual labs with their hypothetical round robin result. And so you can see here on the left, the round robin result is very similar to the compliance result. So that is an accurate compliance test. Over here, you can see in the second column, it's a little bit more spread out, and the compliance test actually is coming in a little bit lower than what the round robin result was. Neither of these are statistically significant at the 95% confidence interval. And so under this proposed rule, these would remain on the shelf labeled as is. But over here on the far right, the 2 columns on the far right, this is what this rule is aiming to address, which is compliance tests that come in very high and then audit testing that comes in significantly lower. And so under this proposed rule, I'll scroll down a little bit, you can see sample number in the graph, it's running left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's a difference between the average round robin and the original compliance test, and then a statistical test of significance. And so you can see here that these first 2 aren't statistically significant. So that means that the difference in the round robin result and the original compliance result could just be purely based on chance or random variation. Whereas 3 and 4, there's a very significant difference between the round robin result and the original compliance result, meaning that it's sort of a real difference, not just purely due to chance or variation. And so this rule would allow us, the OLCC, to require that those products that were significantly different to be relabeled with the average of that audit testing. So instead of being labeled at 32% on the shelf in this example, it would be relabeled at 20%. And instead of being labeled at 35% at the original compliance test, in this example, it would be relabeled at 19%. Again, around sort of giving the consumer what they're paying money for and what it actually is, and reducing the incentive structure to chase those high numbers that aren't actually accurate. Jesse, I see your hand raised.
So with the relabeling, would that also be a recall, or would it just be relabeling everything on shelves?
Can you describe what you mean by what the difference is to you in that? What do you mean by that?
One would be like issuing a consumer recall, where if people had purchased product, like you'd be recalling it or asking the people to recall it, versus just saying, if you have this on the shelf, you have to relabel it.
So this rule is silent on that distinction, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on which you should do.
Well, I think you're trying to do a recall would be incredibly painful and challenging around this, especially if we don't know, I think the recall should be reserved for things that actually pose a direct threat to people's health and well-being. Because I wouldn't want to make it a gray area where someone's like, oh, well, I don't really need to pay attention to that recall. Like, if there's a recall, I think it's something you want people to pay attention to, which means it should be done as little as possible, and for the right things, so that it's really clear that when there is a recall, people should comply. And I don't think having product off by these amounts would constitute that. And so that would be my take on doing a consumer recall. And then as I'm processing all of this information, I'm not sure all of the minutia of what would go through with relabeling everything, but obviously, I'm guessing that's sort of the form of punishment, right, to the licensee. Can you hear me, or am I totally frozen?
Nope, hearing everything. Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. So I guess that would be the thing, but I haven't fully processed what that means yet for folks looking at this. However, I do think that, and I've expressed to the OLCC in the past that there is a strong desire for more lab consistency and predictability. So this seems to be within that line. I guess my question too would be, within some of this, is there when would this go in effect, and would this only be moving forward, or would products that were tested in the past be retroactively subject to this before the rule was written?
Yeah, so I'll I think take your questions or comments in reverse order. So on that last one, the rule would go into effect January, meaning that the authority to require relabeling would be effective then. But there is no line in the sand of, stuff tested before January 1st is exempt from this. It would just be, because the point here is what's on the shelf, right? And what's for sale to consumers. And so there is no categorized violation here unless we were to find at the lab level or producer processor level outright fraudulence or something like that. So just in terms of the relabeling, it's not like there's no financial penalty or categorized violation in here. So it's more about getting stuff that's offered for sale accurate, so that again, consumers are paying what they should for it. On your question about sort of the mechanics of relabeling, I mean, there's relabeling that happens a lot. Sometimes small clarifications or stickers or whatever else, sometimes more substantive. If there's more questions on this, I'd probably punt to Anthony, but I think generally, because the potency is something that can vary without pre-approval, what we do and would do in this instance is, being able to send stickers to retailers to apply those to the labels without necessarily having to claw them back to the producer, the processor, all the way up the supply chain. And then on your point about the recall, appreciate the comments, and I think we definitely also want to make sure that we're not sort of over communicating, for lack of a better term, because there is risk in too much in stuff getting lost in the noise. I do think though that recall is one class of things, but we do things like minor decoy operations where we release those results or post those to our website. So I could see us doing something like that on these, where it's not sort of ringing the bell as loud as we can, but getting the communication out there.
Looks like we have a question from Max and then Laura and a couple of comments in the chat. Max, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Is there a defined process for the round robin? The language in there is very vague. Is there a sample size of labs? Is there a list of laboratories? And is the original sort of, I guess I'd call them the offender lab, would they be included in the round robin that could see results depending on the sample size?
Yeah, so in terms of the specifics there, it's going to vary. I would say in general, I mean, in terms of the statistical test, the fewer labs you have, the less likely you are to prove up on that statistical significance. So the actual number of labs isn't set in stone. But if you test with just one lab or two labs, you're not going to, or it's going to be very unlikely that you find a statistically significant difference, even with a big sort of numeric difference. So it's going to depend on the specifics, but that's why we have it as statistical significance, because the N, right, of the number of labs influences how likely you are to find a difference that would be actionable. And then similarly, in terms of whether the original lab is in the round robin or not, this rule is silent on that. And depending on the specifics of the, you know, where the lab is, the logistical details, the costs, those sorts of things, maybe they'd be in, maybe they'd be out, but would be open to hear your thoughts on that point.
Sure, maybe I can put something together for the next meeting on that, looking at students' T and all that. And then the quick follow-up question I have to that is, you know, I think it was possibly you or David said that it's very difficult to prove these cases of lab outright fraudulent behavior versus errors. Are there any repercussions against the quote unquote, I'm going to keep using the word offender lab because that's what I'm going to use. Are there any repercussions towards that lab that's, you know, putting out 43% potency when all the other labs are showing 22%? And what's the basis for that?
Yeah, so, you know, I think it's going to, the answer to your question is going to be dependent on proof, right? So just because a lab comes out with a result that's 43% and the round robin results come out at 25%, there's nothing in and of itself that's actionable or provable in terms of a violation. But if the evidence, whether it comes about through the round robin testing or through something else, for example, that a producer license keefed a sample, or the lab took it in and just outright, you know, put in a number that wasn't in their analytical data, that would result in a violation. It's just a question of, you know, ability to prove and the evidence that's there. Right?
I guess I should have said that a different way. Will there be further investigation that could result in consequences, I guess is what I meant to ask. And is that defined, that process of investigation? Will ORLAP be involved, that sort of thing?
So the answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, we constantly see, sorry, yes, absolutely. In to your first question, in terms of would this result in any follow-up investigation? That happens all the time, whether we see something in metric or get a complaint or anything else, lab stuff, non-lab stuff. Anytime we get something, we're almost always going to look into it and see if there's a there. And so if we're seeing huge differences in this round robin testing or just testing generally, it does and would continue to prompt sort of further investigation. And we bring in ORLAP into those because they have the more technical expertise. But that sort of the minutia of the cooperation or how that functions is not really, the rule is not the place for that. It's just sort of policy practice and IAAs where warranted. So yeah, we definitely take these things seriously and investigate with our partners who are suited to help.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure you understand where I'm coming from on this, since it's been a longstanding issue, and you know, the lab industry, the majority of my clients, I believe someone from the Retailers Association said majority of their members are all interested in sort of cleaning this up. So that's, you know, where I'm coming from, just FYI. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just further clarify here that this proposed rule change is meant to complement the existing investigation tools and authority we have, not to supplant or replace it. So 100% will continue to take these issues seriously and investigate them and pursue violations where warranted. But this is to give us another tool in the toolbox so that we don't have to prove outright fraudulence in order to sort of correct the direction that things are going.
David Standiford, also with the OLCC, I wanted to expand on that. You'll see a number of different changes that involve labs in this package that do all kind of work in concert together. So the sample retention being a part, this audit testing piece being a part, adding laboratory licensee to the dishonest conduct section, which would include misrepresenting test results to licensees as a dishonest conduct. So there's a number of different changes here that all work towards this. And then one other nuance I want to add to this audit testing piece is, while I think everyone reads this and looks at just really dealing with you know, negligent or incorrect or wrong tests. We also have a concern of licensees who spike samples. And so the lab may not be the one that is creating the error in the test, but the whatever the sample they know is going to get pulled from, you know, we have a concern that that tote or that jar could be manipulated prior to the sampler arriving. And so they may inadvertently be getting an adulterated sample. And so this audit testing rule also addresses that piece with the relabeling too. So it's not just that labs are the concern, but that many different people could be involved in creating these errors.
Looks like Laura had a question. Laura?
So I just wanted to speak briefly on it from a processor standpoint, because I know Jesse represents processors, but I can say specifically that, you know, we do want consistent testing from labs. This has been very important to us since the beginning, so I'm glad we're doing something about it. But I did want to make clear that the punishment that you know we incur, right, as a processor, while there could be an instance that David suggests where someone might be spiking a sample, when you recall a product, that goes out to everyone and not everyone reads it. And then all of those stores now think, oh, I can't order from these people. And I think that sometimes as a processor, it may be warranted. Maybe they are doing something wrong. But we also rely so heavily on these labs to be accurate. And we spend so much money on them trying to get the results that are accurate. So I think that a recall without any evidence of wrongdoing on the side of the processor can bar them from ever selling their brand again. And I think in some instances that is super important, but here would be very serious. And I do also think that while it's expensive to relabel, it's definitely something that I know I would happily do because I want my customers to know the truth. And you know, but do consider that on a product side, you could be talking, you know, 50, 100,000 units that are all over the state that now need new stickers. So it would take some time to relabel and get those stickers out to the different places. So I just wanted you guys to consider that, the time it would take to relabel and all that.
Sorry, this is Jesse. I mean, on one hand, I am excited to see a lot of this happen. On the other hand, it does make me a little bit nervous for folks who have been functioning under the system that existed before. And I know for some of them, they felt like, you know, they were doing whatever they needed to do to create a competitive advantage in a very competitive marketplace and stay afloat. And so just being, you know, so I like having things be retroactively applied makes me a little nervous for the industry. Yeah, especially with, because I think the concern that Laura just brought up of not knowing how that, you know, having to relabel some, like a retailer having to pull everything off a shelf and relabel it could affect their business for that processor might be very, very devastating, especially depending on the size of the retailer and things like that. So I guess I'd say, especially until we know like how big this issue is, just I guess is my tendency would be to provide some sort of historical waiver for people in the past, but it's a very challenging issue, I'll say.
Thanks for the comment, Jesse. And then just based on what you're saying, what Laura was saying, and then I see a comment from Marianne in the chat similarly. You know, I think everyone's sort of speaking implicitly about this, but I'll just say it out. I mean, this is a proposal to solve a tragedy of the commons problem, right? And Jesse, what you're saying is getting at that. I mean, people, from what we heard, are sort of going to the labs that are going to get them the highest result because they think everyone else is going to the same labs to get the highest result and they need shelf space. So this really is about right sizing and resolving that collective action problem, that tragedy of the commons. So, you know, shifting from one world into another is not necessarily going to be painless for people, but it at some point has to happen if we're going to resolve this problem. And I just also say, you know, our ability to do the audit testing is going to be based on bandwidth and resources. So, you know, we're going to, like we do with everything else, we're going to focus our attention to where it's most needed and most warranted on this. So, you know, we're not going to be as concerned about the difference between 20% and 21% on a usable label. We're going to be more concerned with things 35%, 40%, those sorts of things. So that the largest outliers, right? So just something to keep in mind.
And then I want to make sure we save some time at the end for the fiscal impact statements and kind of closing housekeeping. So I think we need to move on to, we have one more substantial change here, which is product recalls 5790. And I will hand it over to David to talk through that one.
All right, David Stanford, OLCC. So this looks like a pretty substantial change. A lot of what this is bringing practice into rule and ensuring that the rule is transparent as possible about how our recall process has been working and where we're trying to get it to. And so just instead of going through this line by line, because there is quite a bit of changes and I wanted to make sure we can get comment on it. And it would probably take a little bit too long to actually read the whole thing. The basic skeleton of it is to bring this recall process to act similarly to how the FDA and ODA and other, you know, larger agencies deal with product recalls. And so this is mimicking that same sort of system. We have been doing heavy revision, as you can see on it. And so we're very much open to feedback about what about this works and doesn't work, because I know there's a lot going on here. But the core, this isn't that we're necessarily dramatically changing what would or wouldn't be recalled. This is capturing the same sort of recalls we've been doing, concerns about, you know, discovering arsenic in a product or discovering someone hasn't put peanuts on the label when it's a required major food allergen. Those are, our priorities are still the same, our concerns are still the same. It's just making a rule reflect what the process fully has been, so licensees understand when we start that conversation with them about a concern, or they come to us with a concern, which we've also had, about a product they manufactured or discovered they were selling that they believe there's a public health or safety issue. It's outlining in the rules so they can understand internally what's going to be asked of them, and they can start prepping and running that process and really giving the industry more agency in that recall process as much as can be done possible. So that's kind of the spirit of what's happening in this rule.
I've never dealt with a recall before. If anybody can provide a little guidance of the things that you guys have run into that are the biggest hurdles or challenges you face when enacting recalls, that might be helpful context.
Sure, I think licensees understanding their distribution list has been definitely a hurdle. Who has their product and where, which is something where the state has a unique ability to look at everyone's metric account and have a much better idea of that. I think making sure licensees are effectively communicating and accurately communicating the nature of the problem that's causing the recall. I think that's commonly an issue between us and a licensee we're working with regarding a recall. And so making sure that the notice that's going out accurately reflects the issue, while understanding, you know, no one wants to, you know, completely ruin their own reputation, but we do need to communicate to consumers why this product is being pulled back and you can return it or should destroy it, that sort of thing. So that's why this looks pretty long, but it's a lot of making sure they have a distribution list and understand who they need to be reaching out to, what information they need to be providing. So a photo of the item, the label ID, a description of what happened, and then kind of carving out some of those timelines around those requirements. Something like in C where it says no later than 48 hours from issuing a recall notice, that they should notify consumers of the recall using the most effective method available. So that wouldn't just be they tweet it out, but maybe if they have had people opt into their email list, that they can send emails out to people to notify them of the concern, or put a large posting at retail regarding it, that sort of thing. So outlining that part. I don't know if that fully answered your question, Jesse, but those are some of the things we've been dealing with. I would also imagine along with this is a lot more education provided to licensees about recall plans and proactively having a recall plan as you develop your business. There's been a lot of discussion around GMP and all of the and other kind of manufacturing practices, and really having a recall plan is a pretty bog standard requirement in a lot of industries, and that is something that I think the OLCC would like to put out more education to licensees about. So when something does happen, they've got an idea of where they're going from, just kind of like how you have to have a posting of where you go if there's a fire, how do you escape the building. Having a recall plan is that same sort of, should have that document available and a plan around that. And we hadn't previously required it, but that's something we want to put education out so people can proactively create one as their business scales up, so they can effectively navigate these issues.
All right, this is Nicole Blase with the OLCC. I do need to start wrapping up, but first we're going to briefly refer to the fiscal impact statement questionnaire, which everyone received with their meeting materials. We'll collect general feedback from the group regarding the possible fiscal impacts of this package. But for those wishing to provide additional feedback, please complete the statement and return it to us no later than Friday, September 9th by emailing it to olcc.rulemaking@oregon.gov, and I will put that in the chat as well. So at this time, is there any feedback on the possible fiscal impacts of these changes that committee members would like to tell us about, keeping in mind we have 10 minutes remaining?
This is Jesse. Anytime there's increased in clarity and predictability, that is a good thing for businesses that are trying to make plans. The reduction of risk is always beneficial. Adding in the clarity on the mitigation and expanding its scope from 30 to 50% will obviously be severely beneficial to folks. And I think if we can make progress on the expungement or recategorizing old violations, especially minor ones, that will be massively beneficial to folks as the market becomes a national marketplace. And that was Jesse from the CIA/ORCA.
Great, thank you. Any other comments about possible fiscal impacts on this rule package before we close out? Okay. Thank you, everyone. If there's additional information you would like to contribute, please complete the fiscal impact statement questionnaire that we provided and return it to us no later than September 9th. And we are ready to wrap up unless anybody has any last comments, questions. All right. On behalf of the OLCC, I want to thank our panelists today for providing their expertise on these issues. A notice of public hearing will be issued in the coming months, which will allow for interested parties to provide testimony or submit written comments. For more information, please visit our website or email us at olcc.rulemaking@oregon.gov. Thank you, everyone, for joining today, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.